Well, the free sharing of culture has very many sides and so many gray zones and safe havens that the anti-piracy lobby can only attack a very small part at a time. Or, of course, they can attack free internet communications in general, as they more and more try to do right now. Rendering this dilemma visible is done when we give up talking about things in the copyright industry's universal terms, and instead shifts the focus to the diverse reality of cultural circulations that we could call the gray commons.
The gray zone also becomes visible if you put the attention to how arbitrary the very definition of copying is, how it is based on outdated technical categories. There is a tactical point in clarifying how it's getting harder to distinguish between local transfers of data, for example in wireless environments, and file sharing between different systems. Clarifying that digital technology is built on copying and that internet is built on file sharing. Copying is always already there. The only thing the copyright can do is to impose a pseudo-moral differentiation between so-called normal workings and immoral. For the copyright industry, it is of extreme importance to keep people uninformed of the real workings of network computers. They want to make an artificial distinction between downloading and streaming as equivalent to record distribution and radio broadcasting. Our role here is to keep insisting that the only difference lies in the software configuration at the receiving end. But copyright law will never be able to acknowledge that. It has to rely on fiction, on a kind of cognitive mapping, where notions valid for traditional one-way mass media are forcefully applied to the internet. We call this mental rights management.
Yeah, mental rights management. It's essential for the copyright industry to keep the majority of computer users trapped in believing that the window of their web browser is exactly a window through which they can look at information located elsewhere under someone else's control. Our job here is about making clear that everything you see on your screen or hear through your speakers is already under your control. Zeros and ones have no taste, no smell, no color, be they parts of pirated material or not. And therefore, it's impossible to construct a computer that cannot reproduce and manipulate these zeros and ones, as such a machine would no longer be a computer, but something as grotesque as a digital simulation of the machines of the last century. But of course, the aim of copyright is to do exactly that. Copyright was basically born in 18th century England in order to regulate the use of one specific machine, a machine that was expensive, few in numbers, and that could write but not read, namely the printing press. Ever since, copyright laws have tried with varying success to make other machines imitate the characteristics of that one-way medium. And the concept was pretty easily adapted to the first technologies of sound and image recording, as gramophone and film entered around the turn of the last century. But in the 70s, machines that could both read and write was spread to a wider population, like the Xerox paper copying machine, the audio cassette, and video recorders. This transformed the production of culture, as well as the distribution. Remix, cut-up, and mash-up cultures flourished, with early adopters like William S. Burroughs.
The industry started to claim that home taping was killing music. From the beginning, they wanted to stop the technology altogether. However, the common compromise solution in Western Europe came the introduction of a special tax on magnetic tapes in order to compensate the copyright holders for their calculated loss of sales. Since that time, the sampler, the CD burner, portable memory devices had continued to make life greater. Now we got the combination of home computers, broadband network protocols, compression algorithms that defines what is known as P2P, and file sharing. As we stand here today, a fair question must be if a principle that was implemented to control printing press in the 18th century England should be the whole which our present world should circulate through. Some people argue that, like a great work of art, copyright has been standing the test of time. But for us, it's only a confirmation how strong the basic function of information control is in society, that we, and as we depart from this control, are reaching further into the future.
Well, some voices now call for a so-called alternative compensation system as a way to save both the copyright system and the file sharing. The idea usually is that the special fee should be imposed on every internet connection so that the bureaucracy could channel the money to publishers and other right holders. It has been presented as a progressive alternative to mass criminalization and is advocated by, amongst others, Lawrence Lessig, the EFF, many people in the French parliament now, and here in Germany by the campaign Fair Sharing, supported by, for example, Attac and CCC. However, a rather extraordinary development during this year, 2005, is that the anti-piracy organizations have also started to adopt this idea. In Sweden, Anti-Piratbyrån has made numerous demands about the so-called right for so-called content producers to rob the ISPs on part of their income. A British ISP has gone into a joint venture with Sony BMG, offering its customers the legal right to share Sony BMG-controlled music, as long as they pay this flat rate fee, and as long as they accept that their file transfers are monitored and stopped if the filters detect transfers to people who not use the same ISP. People like Cory Doctorow from the EFF did applaud this as a step in the right directions. We see it more as a clear example of internet sabotage and economical blackmail from an industry that cannot accept to be pushed out by the future. So we have actually never been interested at all in so-called alternative compensation systems, as we generally find it is based on a thinking totally grounded in pre-digital media, based on the principle of loss, and denies the complexity of circulation in networks. So the copyright industry today likes to present the problem as if internet were just a way for so-called consumers to get so-called content. And we now just got to have a reasonable distribution of money between ISPs and the content industry. But we must never fall in that trap, and we can avoid it by refusing to talk about content altogether. Instead, we talk about internet as communication media. And I mean, as clever entrepreneurs, of course, also do understand, internet business is not about selling information. It is about selling the possibility to interact. And in addition to file sharing, people use their broadband connection to so many kinds of production, circulation, and communication. And therefore, it's totally wrong to regard our role as to represent consumer interests. On the contrary, it's all about leaving the artificial division of humanity into the two groups, producers and consumers, behind. But that division is constantly upheld by the copyright economy. One example is how independent music producers are robbed on money by collecting societies like GEMA in Deutschland, STIM in Sweden. Licenses have to be paid for concerts, for storage media, and for internet radio, and that's money that goes to the officially recognized producers, according to record sales statistics, basically. Another example regards the movie industry's bizarre lobbying to plug the analog hole by introducing a law banning video equipment able to rip analog media. The law proposal put forward by the MPIA mentions that So-called professional producers, of course, should have a license to use these video cards anyway. So the effect would, of course, be an extreme consolidation of the split between producers and so-called users. But at the same time, it's important to understand the schizophrenic nature of industry. I mean, companies like Microsoft and Sony are already totally dependent on what they call user-generated content, as people are willing to pay for a possibility to exchange their own sounds and pictures via different communication protocols. So, overcoming the split between producers and consumers, it's not some utopia of a world to come. That future is already here. The split is an abstraction that reinforces itself through the copyright economy, at the same time as it is undermined by the internet's desiring production.
Maybe the most important now is to bypass the urge for solutions, for victory in battles and for compromise and stability. For example, talking about how to compensate copyright holders is to obscure the truth about the social production of culture, replacing it with the myth about copyright as some kind of wage for artists. And while some of the Creative Commons license can of course be useful, it would also be a trap to believe in that a some rights reserved approach would do anything to cool down the anomalies that we are talking about. On the contrary, keep insisting on the gray zone and keep it as wide and as open as possible will almost automatically produce a better conditions for going beyond the prevalent economic imperatives. Making general statements about the alternative of copyright always brings the danger of strengthening copyright's universality claim. We think that our project has in general succeeded in escaping the most obvious ritualizations, like explaining file sharing just as a response to expensive records and instead open new greystones. Make new links, make them live and kicking. Let the body of file sharing strategies become more unpredictable and more elastic to the constant pressure. The Pirate Bay is one example today, but we would also like to mention wonderful tools of other kinds like Audio Scrobbler that helps people conceptualizing their relation to circulation of music outside the abstractions of the boring copyright mythology. While intellectual property will continue to be a battleground for the major clampdowns in society, there will always be innumerable loss of ways. Our approach has not very much to do with overcoming lack of access, not even with opposition of dominant forms of culture. The drive of discovering, thinking, inventing alternative processes of production is the affirmative power of life as a vital experiment of complexity. Internet piracy is all about desiring production, and in the deepest effects in the long run are beyond our human capacity to compute. As Walter Benjamin talked about art as the production of desires that cannot yet be satisfied, but inevitably will reach far beyond the goals originally impossible to imagine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if someone has any questions, then they maybe should take my microphone.
I have just one simple question. I don't understand purely your attitude. You say copying is always good, copy everything, because this attitude, I don't understand it. Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
Well, personally, I don't understand what else you could think. I mean, some copying is bad. I don't know. I don't understand it. In fact.
Okay, just